Welcome to County Conversation. I'm Chris Coates, and this is a podcast really bringing to you a better understanding of county government. Also, when we have the opportunity, bringing individuals in to get a better understanding of other programs, agencies, nonprofits, or in a few weeks, we hope to be traveling to a site, to a business, and doing an interview right on site. And so, just so you get a really clear picture of what government's about, yes, but at the same time, and what it's doing for you. But also, we've got some really great things going on in this community, and we want to bring that to you too. So today we have Josh Meehan, who is Executive Director of Keene Housing. He's going to be joining us and talking about Keene Housing and the program as a whole and what it brings to this community in this region. So good morning.
Good morning.
So, all right, let's start right off.
Okay.
Keene Housing. Explain what Keene Housing is.
Okay. Keene Housing is the housing authority for the city of Keene, first and foremost. So formed by an act of city government in 1965.
Okay.
We have 5 board members, commissioners, as you know, being the chair of said board. And those are nominated by the mayor and then voted on for approval by city council. 4 of those people are just folks from the community. 1 is always a resident of ours. And that's really our tie back to the city. We were created by an act of the city, but we don't get any funding or anything like that from the city. Our connection to the city is through you guys, through our board. So we own and operate 600, give or take, units of affordable housing in the region.
So you own some type of properties that house people. That's the 600.
That's the 600. And then we also administer for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development voucher program, housing choice voucher program. And so that's a combination of vouchers that people take out into the community to help them pay their rent in market apartments, as well as some of those vouchers are actually attached to units that we own, which is how those units maintain their affordability over time.
Let's start with the apartments first that you have. So, where are the majority of the housings that you have? Do you have any currently under construction? And then where are they outside the city?
Sure. So the majority of our housing is in the city of Keene, because back in the day when we were first created in 1965, there was an effort to build what was a particular product, which is public housing, in the 60s and into the 80s. We no longer have public housing. Those units were converted to a different platform. They're still affordable, but they're no longer public housing. But the point of that is, initially, Keene Housing, then Keene Housing Authority, built in the city of Keene. So the majority of our properties are there. But in subsequent years, in the 2000s especially, we started acquiring property and land outside of Keene. And today, we have a fairly large footprint in Swansea. We have 2 properties in Swansea, and we have properties in Marlborough as well. And then our voucher program goes all over the region.
So, are there standards that you have to maintain to have the funding come through so that the areas are always? I would guess that you would want that anyways, but it's that you're going through HUD for your funding.
Yeah.
And so do they have certain standards that you have to meet to have these apartments on a long-term basis?
Yeah, so the way to think of us is, in a lot of ways, we're like a federal contractor.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of, when we think of federal contractors, my default is always people who are building jets, companies that are building jets and tanks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a military contractor who's building tanks and jets, it's building to federal specs, and then the feds come in and kick the tires on the jet to make sure that everything is okay. We have a similar relationship. So we have contracts with primarily the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. We do have 1 property that's contracted with U.S. Department of Agriculture. But generally, in exchange for the funding to either build our properties or to keep them subsidized so that the people living in them pay less than market rent so that they can afford to live in them, we have obligations to the feds. And those obligations include making sure that the properties are well maintained and that units are in good shape. And then depending on the funding sources that we use to actually build them, because it's typically not just federal funds to build the stuff that we build and operate, there are investors who invest in those who also come and kick the tires on the properties to make sure that we're maintaining them appropriately. So we have a lot of eyes on us and on our properties. But of course, for us, as an organization that is mission driven, part of our values are to make sure that the properties that we own and manage have fantastic curb appeal for a couple of reasons. And one is so that the people living there don't feel like they're living in anything other than great housing that they rent, just like anybody else who's renting housing in the marketplace.
Well, I can say, being one that lives near one of our sites, they're I think they're maintained incredibly so. And I think people have an opportunity. You have gardens there. Yeah. You have a center for, and we'll get into that a little bit too, and talk a little bit about the Kids Collaborative at some point. Yeah. But it's I think that's one of those things that I think helps communities understand that this is housing like any other situation, and these people are there to work in our community and to be able to have something over their head, and we move forward. So I think it's a good thing. Qualifications.
Well, and it's often the case with housing. The answer is it depends. So depending on the type of program that we use to create the housing or that we rely on for operating subsidy from the feds, it kind of depends. Generally speaking, you would be what's called 80% or under area median income. Mm-hmm. So it's really all these programs are means tested. Mm-hmm. So 80% of area median income is the ceiling for a lot of our properties. A few 60% of area median income. But realistically, when we look at who we serve and who we are unable to serve right now because they're sitting on that waiting list, right, the vast majority of people that we are serving or are going to hope to be serving are closer to 50 or 30% of area median income. So lower income, even than the ceiling for eligibility. So, for example, our average working family, which is a family of three, earns around $33,000 a year for a family of three.
Okay, and have you seen, probably on the vouchers side more than on the housing side, have you seen with increased rents it would be more problematic? And how do you balance for that? How do you find make your numbers work with the increase in that?
Well, one thing that we're able to do is we're able to look at where the market is and do our best to set what's called our voucher payment standard. So as you know well, this stuff gets really wonky really, really fast. Yes. But basically the way it works is every year HUD does a survey. They say a one-bedroom apartment in Keene is worth X. And then we take X and we say, okay, is X really how close to that actual market is it? Then we adjust a little bit upwards. So we create a voucher payment standard that's a little bit higher than what HUD typically says an apartment is worth. But it's still not competitive in the marketplace because the FMR, the fair market rents that HUD publish, are actually the 40th percentile of the median. So they're less than the median rents. Okay. So they're already folks with vouchers that are disadvantaged in the marketplace. Okay. So we boost that a little bit, but what we have to balance is our funding doesn't go up when we decide an apartment is worth more than HUD says it is. Mm-hmm. So we are still constrained by our funding. So we have to find this balance between setting our payment standards for a one bed, $1,200 right now. Setting that in a place where it's useful to people, but also where we don't run out of money so that people who have a voucher can't actually use it because we can't fund it. And we're in a good spot compared to a lot of other housing authorities, but there's housing authorities all over the country right now who are struggling because they can't keep up with the market. And they, now don't have enough funding to issue more vouchers, but their vouchers are costing more because rents are going up so high. We're protected from a lot of that for reasons that you know well, which is our moving to work designation, which maybe we'll get to talk about. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I think what everybody recognizes here, whether you're a six-figure earner or a five-figure earner, is that there's not enough supply.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're buying a home or trying to rent a home, there's not enough supply. And that's really what we're up against right now. So for us, the increase in the rental market, while it makes it hard for our folks to rent, what really makes it hard for them to rent is that they simply can't find a place to rent. Mm-hmm. And that is a conversation about supply.
Is there a wait list to get into the housing?
Yes. So right now we actually just did what's called, it has a sort of scary name, a waitlist purge. So every couple of years, as the names build up on our waiting lists, we take a minute, we send a self-addressed stamped envelope with a letter to everybody on the waiting list, and we say, hey, you're on the waiting list for whatever it is you applied for. Please indicate you still want to be on the waiting list. Put that back in the envelope we just gave you with a stamp and send it back to us. So we just did one of those purges. Mm-hmm. And we went from around 3,000 people on our waiting list for housing we own and manage down to about 1,600, which is really a big change and good. But think about that. There's 1,600 households waiting for an apartment that we own or manage, and we own and manage 600. And similarly, our voucher program, when we did the same purge for the voucher program, and that number didn't really move at all. That's 2,500 people waiting for a voucher. Now, the next question is always, well, are they from here or are they from away? And typically what we find is about half are from here and half are from away.
So when you say here and away, what does that mean?
So for us, here to us, when we're analyzing our waiting list, really means Keene or an adjacent community. So somebody that's reasonably considered in that region is here, and away would be Concord.
So the bottom line is if somebody qualifies, they can be on anybody's wait list, mm-hmm. And same for vouchers too.
Yeah, so you can't say to somebody because you're from Florida, you can't apply for an apartment with us. Especially if we think about it, it could be because they're returning home, or they're coming to take care of their mom, or whatever the case may be. So we can't say to somebody you can't get on our waiting list. But we do have a preference for folks from New Hampshire on our waiting list. So you will move faster if you're a Grand Stater than if you're not a Grand Stater.
Okay. You touched on it a little bit, but I would like to have the community understand that we're a national model. We have been for some years now. Yeah. And initially, we were one of very few, but it's called Moving to Work. And it allows us to be more flexible. And the reason I keep saying we is because I am on the board. And so can you talk a little bit about what that means, why we got into it?
Sure.
What's the benefit? And what are some of the challenges it presents? And I think benefits can get underneath where you can take and use monies in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so in 1996, mm-hmm. There was this sort of triangulation thing going on between Clinton and Newt Gingrich, where they were, whatever position one picked, and the other one picked a position here, and they kind of found their way to something sort of in the middle often. And welfare reform was in vogue at the time. Mm-hmm. And so some very smart folks saw that as an opportunity in the housing world to try something different and something new. So 1937, Congress creates the 37 Housing Act, which creates public housing. There's no voucher program until Nixon. And so you can imagine from 1937 all the way to 1996, you have the invention of all sorts of new housing programs in addition to public housing. Mm-hmm. And then you wind up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of regulations.
Right.
And then each one of those new regulations is then pushed out to the housing authorities who are administering these federal contracts. And it got very complicated, and it still is extraordinarily complicated, as you know. So in 96, some smart folks said, okay, let's create a new program called the Moving to Work Deregulation Demonstration Program. It's a horrible name for a really cool program. And what they said was, let's allow a small number of very high-performing housing authorities to toss out huge chapters of the regulations that have been promulgated since 1937 and say, okay, in exchange for this regulatory flexibility, we want to see if you can use the federal funds that you're contracted to get more efficiently, if you can house more people, and if you can help work-able people to achieve greater self-sufficiency. Those are basic. There's a couple other things, but those are the big ones.
Okay.
And my predecessor, Kurt Hebert, was very, very future-seeing, really smart, and thinking about what a housing authority might look like today, because this is 1996 when the bill passes. And he threw our hat in the ring to be one of the initial MTW agencies. And we were the smallest by far at the time. And we got in, the law passed in 96. HUD issued invitations to apply for moving to work in 99. We came in 2000. So we're part of the initial cohort, the very, very first cohort of MTW agencies.
I think it's important, though, isn't it? Because, like you just said, we're the smallest. You want to see on all sizes how it fits, how it works, and do you need to adapt depending on the sizes of the housing?
For sure, and and I think that's demonstrated by the fact that in 2016, the Congress added another 100 agencies, MTW agencies, out of the 3,000 something housing authorities in the country. So we're now at 139. And when they passed that law in 2016, they explicitly said to HUD, make sure that you have a wide distribution by size of agency and geographic distribution to get more smaller rural agencies like ours into moving to work. In part, I think, because we had demonstrated how effective it was for us. And in fact, things that we've tried here in Keene are now national law. They're like literally in statute now. Every housing authority in America can sort of start to play around the edges of things that were started here.
Because we were there at the beginning, has that put us at the forefront nationally? And does that mean that we play a role? Do you? I know Kurt did, and I know you do, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. But because I think it's important that we have a voice on the national levels. Do you sit on any boards? Are you part of that? And how does that support what we're doing?
So following in Kurt's footsteps, and this was something that the board was interested in when I came here, and it's also frankly part of why I came here at all. Because, you know this, but I was at the Houston Housing Authority before I came here. People thought it was nuts, I think, to leave a giant agency, because in the housing world, often the size of the agency is really meaningful in your career.
Yeah.
And to sort of come to such a small place, relatively speaking, and to do this work in a smaller environment, people thought it was crazy. But the reason I came was because of moving to work. We didn't have that in Houston, and because of the prominent role that Keene Housing has always played in the national dialogue around affordable housing issues, specifically around housing authority issues. So yeah, I try to continue that, playing a leadership role in two of our national, sort of housing authority national groups, FADA, which is for Housing Authority Directors Association, and the MTW Collaborative, which is industry groups specific to moving to work agencies that me and some other folks helped create a few years back, and now I think we're like 7 years in. And then when Congress expanded MTW in 2016, they created something called the Research Advisory Committee that would advise HUD on what the expansion of MTW ought to look like, and we were asked to be part of that too. So that was a fun experience.
Are we, or do we have to be, or are we accredited?
We are accredited. We don't have to be accredited. We are. Unfortunately, the accreditation board has gone away since we were accredited, so our accreditation will end. But that was a fun and meaningful process to become accredited. Unfortunately, we were early adapters, and there's a handful of us, a bunch of us MTWs actually, who got accredited. But then the Affordable Housing Accreditation Board couldn't keep going. So hoping it will be resurrected at some point. But it was an important exercise to go through accreditation and become accredited.
Is there a statewide affiliation?
There is the New Hampshire Housing Authority Corporation. Yeah.
And do you sit on that?
Yeah, I'm on that, and I'm the legislative committee chair, and I'm legislative VP of legislation for FADA.
When you take a look at housing, there's costs that go into it. Do you think about how you can reduce your energy costs? Do you look at other ways?
That's great softball. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think as you know, there's not a lot of new subsidy or income or new contracts, however you want to think about it, coming from Congress to affordable housing providers, especially housing authorities. Keeping in mind that our only constituency on Capitol Hill are the people we house and us.
Mhm.
So we don't have the same sort of constituencies that some other sectors of affordable housing development does have, where they have equity investors and large banks and others. So they tend to have a larger voice on the Hill than housing authorities. They do. So what we have to figure out is, okay, there's no tranche of new income that Congress at no point is going to say, you know what, we're not spending enough on vouchers. Here's $500 million for vouchers. That's really not going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future. Although Congress is paying attention to housing in a different way now. We can talk about that. So what we have to do is say, okay, our income's not about to spike because our rents are fixed and what people pay are determined by their income. So what can we do? We can look at operating costs. So in 2014, we benchmarked the energy performance of the entire portfolio and identified areas where we could improve so as to reduce our operating costs. And then either boldly or stupidly, we committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2035 to sort of push us. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to say we've made tremendous progress since then on the sort of low-hanging energy efficiency stuff, building envelopes, LED lighting, toilets, showers, all that stuff we did. And we saw tremendous savings in water almost overnight. It was really meaningful. And so now we've transitioned to starting to grow our own energy. That's kind of where by 2035, that's our real big push. We've done some solar projects over the last few years, but we're about to really go gangbusters thanks to changes in the Inflation Reduction Act that give us access to tax credits that before the IRA, we weren't able to get our hands on, and now we can. And some changes in statute in New Hampshire that also made it easier for us to apply for some state grants for solar for low and moderate income people as well. So that's an area of development that we're really interested in and are pursuing very aggressively.
Are you part of any coalition at this point? In reducing cities or Cheshire Power or any of that?
Well, so this is another really complicated answer.
Oh, wonky again.
Yes, it gets super wonky because we do buy our electricity competitively. So the county, the city, all of these new sort of opportunities to get reduced energy costs are in the mix, but we had already locked in some contracts for that.
Yeah.
But we never bought default. It's been years since we bought default. So we've always put our portfolio out for the market, and then people bid on it, and then we take the lowest bid. But as we start to increase our solar production, the calculus changes for lots of complicated reasons as to whether or not we take default energy or we buy from the marketplace, either from any of these sort of coalitions that are in the region, or as we've done in the past, where we literally put our portfolio out for bid and take a low bid.
Yeah.
But it really relates to how we produce our energy, what we do with it, and how it gets back in the grid.
So, all right. So I want to get back to vouchers because is when you and say again how many vouchers you have right now.
We have about 815 vouchers, give or take, and they're not all used right now, but that's our allocation from HUD. And then there's people out on the streets all the time. We always have 13 to 15 people who have newly issued vouchers trying to find a apartment.
Is it getting harder for people to find housing for vouchers because people are getting the monies that they're getting so they can go out and rent to anybody and they don't have to? And is it a deterrent? Is there some level of criteria if you're going to be accepting voucher funding that your housing has to be at?
Well, so New Hampshire is the only state in New England that doesn't protect voucher holders from discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So in all the rest of New England, there's something called source of income protection. So you can't say to somebody, I won't take a voucher. Now, Does that still happen in all the surrounding states, but they say it in a different way?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's the case.
Right.
But there are legal protections now, and there's legal ramifications if somebody refuses to rent to somebody because they don't like where they get their rent from.
Yeah.
Which
Which is always interesting to me because it's like you can rent from somebody that you don't know where if the check is always going to be there, or you can
Right.
you know our end of the money is going to be
our money is going to be there, absolutely. But there is this getting to your question about the condition of the apartment. We do an inspection.
Yeah.
Because we are using taxpayer dollars. I mean, the renter, the voucher holders using their money, and then we're complementing their money with taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
So we do have an obligation to make sure, just as people are making sure that our apartments are in good shape, we have that same obligation to make sure that private market units that are being rented by folks with vouchers are also in good shape so that they meet what's called housing quality standards, HQS. So, they're not extravagant, but they have to be safe and they have to be in good working order. Sort of basics, but they don't have to be palaces. You're still competing in the marketplace.
So if you are looking at 815 vouchers out there, and they're not all being utilized, and this is for individuals that also have disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a veterans program?
We don't have a specific veterans program.
If they qualify, they just qualify.
Yeah, they would just qualify. Yeah. HUD does have a program called VASH, but we don't have any VASH vouchers here in Keene.
Okay. So that leads me to the next question. How do you start moving forward for the future? Now, you've had it. If people don't know, there is a project that's happening at the old Roosevelt School.
Yeah.
But you've also had to do over the last few years some upgrades to some of the other buildings.
Yeah.
Is it Meadowbrook?
Meadow Road. Rehabs. Central Square Terrace was the biggest one during COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're constantly, so like you build something and then if you get too far away from it, sometimes you forget what it takes to maintain it. And,
right.
And these buildings get old. And unlike a lot of other affordable housing programs where the owner is committing to 15 or 30 years of affordability, we're a mission-driven organization. So we're in it literally forever.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means for us is that we need to be really planful and careful about maintaining the properties that we have. And as great of a job as we do on the routine maintenance side, by year 30 or 45 or 50, you need to make big investments and recapitalizations into these older properties. So you're right, we have this constant balance of, finite funding. And of course, I think we're really good. Our staff is tremendously successful at finding grants. I mean, that's kind of like one of our superpowers to help to find financing and funding to do these larger projects. But it's a constant balance between maintaining what we have and then trying to find opportunities to build something new like Roosevelt School.
And here's the thing, you touched on it too, the political climate. Because I've been, this is my second turn on the board.
Yeah.
And I've worked with Republican and Democrats, and either way, it's been a good relationship.
Yeah.
Because I think they understand the work we're doing.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to. I think that's a good thing.
It's
all too often when you hear Washington is broken, I just think that's an easy throw out there. And there is a lot of good stuff that's happening down there, and housing happens to be one where they listen to us. We have champions on both sides throughout the years that will fight for us. And our federal delegation has heard us when we needed them too.
Absolutely. I mean, I worked in Massachusetts, and then I worked in Texas, and I worked here. In all three places, advocating for our residents on Capitol Hill was in my job description. Mm-hmm. And New Hampshire has been a real standout for me so far in my career in terms of the federal delegation, as you say, irrespective of party, genuinely listening, being approachable, and being willing to do what they can to help. Mm-hmm. And that is really remarkable and something that I'm very grateful for being in New Hampshire.
Yeah. If I'm a tenant living in some of our housing, can they move from if they see they get in.
Yeah.
That's the
one of
first
our
reason.
units.
In one of our
Yeah.
units, they get in.
Yeah.
And that was their first goal. But
Yeah.
they really wanted to live here. And that unit opens up. Can they transfer? Can they put something in?
Yeah, so you can request a transfer. However, just as I was saying on the application side, there's preferences for applications. So there's all these different weighting criteria. Um, it's similar on transfers because if there's an emergency transfer, which is defined, that's going to go before.
Yeah.
I live at Meadow. I'd really love to live at North and Gilsum, or I'd like to move out to Riverbend because I have a job now. It's closer to Swansea and Keene.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. You're going to get on the wait list for a transfer, and you could eventually that could work for you, but sort of emergencies, people who need accessibility features that their unit doesn't have, and then a unit opens up that does have those features, they're always going to go ahead. But there is a world where if you wait long enough and the stars align, you could.
Do you have apartments that allow pets?
We do have some, yeah, but not. You're not going to see like big giant dogs like our dogs. You're not going to see our dogs, but you might see a smaller dog, and of course amphibians and things.
And with renting out to people with disabilities, do you have handicapped accessible and taking a step further, any of them that have tracking? So if they need a lift that brings them from here to here.
Yeah, so we don't, that I'm aware of, have tracking in any of our units. We do now at Harper Acres on Castle Street. The stair lift, the thing that gets you up the rail. They're everywhere.
2 hours later, they're halfway up the stairs.
Yes, those we have been we've been retrofitting Harper Acres for that, so that all of the buildings down on Castle Street, except for 109, which is a family building, have those. But to your question about accessibility, we look at our waiting list. Maybe 2/3, I don't have it in front of me, but easily I'll say at least 2/3 of our waiting list are people looking for studios or one bedrooms. And of those, at least a half are elderly or disabled folks, possibly more. And what that tells us is what we already know about the demographics of our state, which is that we're getting older faster than any state in the union, except maybe Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And so your question about accessibility is a really important one because, for example, at the school, Roosevelt School East, there's a requirement for the number of accessible units that a developer needs to include in a building when they're building a new building or turning something that wasn't housing into housing. Mm-hmm. So, but what we're doing is we're tripling that number. So we're going to have 9 out of the 30 units at Roosevelt School East are going to be fully accessible, meaning that if you have a wheelchair, you can get up into your apartment, and then you can maneuver around your apartment, roll into the shower, all of it. And that's expensive for us to do that. You don't typically see, developers tripling the number of what's called UFAS units, fully accessible units. But we are doing that at the school because we're looking at our waiting list and we're looking at the demographics and we're looking at where our region is headed demographically, and we know we need to prepare for that. And also, there's a social benefit to that because between the accessibility features that we build into our properties and the resident services we provide to the people living in them, we're making it so that folks don't need to go into nursing as quickly as they ordinarily would, which helps the whole community. People can age in place happily and longer in our apartments because we're being thoughtful about who's going to be living there and how they maneuver around those apartments.
One of your goals was to enrich and strengthen the lives of the individuals that are in our care. And so there's some residents, and I don't know if is it an expectation or requirement or just an opportunity for self-reliance programs, and because you want the individual to get stronger. You want them to move on. You've got a wait list. You want to strengthen them. They, for whatever reason, they are here, and a lot of people just need that moment in time, but they also need some guidance. Is there opportunity for people to learn how to budget a little bit better, understand the economic situation they're in, and see how they can get to the next level? And because of moving to work, is there a little bit more room for people to stay a little bit longer? Because sometimes it's that sometimes they hit a certain criteria. I would think they'd have to move on, and they're just not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
there's a lot there. I just asked you.
That's okay. No, well, we'll see if we can summarize and describe. So, for the most part, if you're a non-elderly household, so that means you're between the ages of 18 and 62, and the head of household is not disabled, we have a whole department and really hardworking, compassionate folks who will help you establish, okay, where are you now? Where do you want to get economically? And then we can help you with that, help you get there. And in fact, depending on which, it gets complicated fast, but part of our rent determination methodology for a subset of those working able households are actually on something called step rent, which is an experiment. That's a moving to work experiment, where rather than in most affordable housing programs, you pay 30% of your income, no matter what. So if your income goes up, we tax you by a third in the form of an increase in your rent. If your income goes down, you pay a third less. So built into that whole system, one could argue is a disincentive to increase your income. And then couple that with the cliff effect. So when you get your income high enough, you lose your child care benefit. So we have to do this careful dance. So what we try to do is try to work with folks in lots of different ways to see where are you now, where do you want to be, and how do we get you there. But to your point, a lot of people just need a minute. Like they just need a minute to be able to afford where they live. And that's kind of, it's a whole other story, but we're doing this random control trial rent determination experiment. It's a 9-year longitudinal study that was developed in part by a professor at UNC and being run by this research organization called the Republican Affordable Housing Research Corporation. And what we're doing is doing a 9-year study where we're randomly assigning work-able families to one of several groups to see, is there some combination of rent-determined methodology and resident service provision that predicts a better long-term socioeconomic outcome than any other. And that's a whole other show that probably nobody wants to do. But it's an example of what we're doing here in Keene, that when that study is done, and what are we in, year 3 now? So in 6 years from now, when that study is published, fairly confident that it's going to impact the national conversation around how these programs are designed, and specifically wherein they're designed for work-able families to become increase their socioeconomic mobility.
Okay. All right. So we got about 4 minutes, so I'm going to
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can always go longer.
No. Let's go.
Okay. I want 2 things. Roosevelt. Just talk about the phases real quick, and then I want to get the kids collaborating in there.
Okay, great. So Roosevelt School, as folks in and around Keene know, there's the Roosevelt Elementary School, built in the early 1900s, had lots of different lives. We bought it. We're doing adaptive reuse of the existing building, so we kind of gut it and then make it into apartments and then build a new wing of new apartments. Heading south on the south side where the gym is now, the gym's coming down, new housing. That'll be 30 units, 22 1-beds, 8 2-beds. 5 of those units are supportive service units set aside for homeless folks or folks at risk of immediate homelessness. They'll have intensive services from our staff. That's phase 1. That's under construction right now.
Okay.
That should be done summer 26. The end of October 31st of this October, our applications go in for funding for phase 2, which will be behind the old building. Another 30 units of brand new construction, more or less the same distribution, 22 1-bedrooms, 8 2-bedrooms, 6 units set aside for homeless or folks who are at immediate risk of homelessness with intensive support services. There'll be community gardens, there'll be a playground, all that stuff. Although we know, based on the distribution of bedroom sizes, it's going to be mostly elderly and disabled folks.
All right, and it's just going to improve that. I mean, it's going
to look great.
Yeah, it's already starting to look great just by mowing the lawn. And then, last but not least, the Kids
Kids
Collaborative, which really was a great vision of yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for emceeing the breakfast on Friday. That was amazing. Real quick, Keene Housing Kids Collaborative. When I joined the Keene Housing, we had a sort of small after school program for our kids. And what we thought about doing, and you were on the board at the time when we did this, was basically funding an organization independent of us that would serve kids living in Keene housing properties and using vouchers in the marketplace based on this thing called the social genome model, which was a longitudinal study that was done that the Brookings Institute sort of followed, and low-income children who hit these set of developmental benchmarks. There's a causal relationship between them hitting those benchmarks and them having higher socioeconomic outcomes than children who didn't hit those benchmarks. Causal, not a correlation, actual causality. Mm-hmm. So we said, geez, let's see if we can replicate that here, like in a relatively geographically isolated place that's relatively rural. Can we try it here? And that's what the Kids Collab has been working on for, I think, 9 years now. And it's grown quite a bit.
In my world of thinking, it's pretty simple. It's giving kids that may not have the opportunity to do some of these activities that, and they also get support. They have a place where they can go do their homework after school if they choose. So they have the internet if they don't have it in their homes, or they don't have a laptop or a computer or desktop or whatever. They have the ability to go horseback riding. They have the ability to play sports, be able to afford some spikes or, whatever they need to for the sport they're playing. It's really, really simple stuff. It just, makes them feel valued within the environment that they're in. And I think that's important.
Yeah, me too. And all the research that's come out since we started the collab really backs up that we were onto something. Most recently, Raj Chetty was this very, very famous researcher. He's one who did research that both Bush and Clinton used. They brought him in to think about how they might expand opportunities for low-income children when they became presidents. Mm-hmm. What he's done in that research showed that your zip code is the best predictor of your socioeconomic outcome as an adult. Mm-hmm. And then he's done a subsequent research project that has shown an even better indicator is the income of your peers that you hung out with when you were a kid. And so what the Kids Collab does, it's like, it's that. Yeah. It's right there. It's getting lower income children to participate in activities that children who are middle class and upper class and wealthy participate in that low income kids can't normally participate in because their families either can't get them to the classes or they can't afford the stuff that you need for class or they can't afford the class itself. So, right. And the collab's been great because that's something that we created and we set it free. Yeah. And let it be its thing. And it's really flourishing and it's wonderful. And now Southwestern Community Services has a couple properties that are served by the Kids Collab, and it's been wonderful to kind of create something and watch it grow.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, we've been talking to Josh Meehan. He is the Executive Director of Keene Housing. If somebody wants to reach out and has a housing need, how do they contact?
You can email us at info@keenehousing.org. You could visit our website, which is www.keenehousing.org. And you could call us at 603-352-6161. Or you could drop by 831 Court Street. Come say hi.
All right. Thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate having time
Thanks
today.
For having me.
We will be back next week with another episode of County Conversation. Again, I'm Chris Coates, and thank you for listening in.